I'm John Gormley. Welcome and good to have you here this Tuesday edition, and I thank you for checking in wherever we find you across the great province of our Saskatchewan. Well, every single month, Premier Brad Wall joins us for a session, a 1-hour radio session called Ask the Premier. Now, there are many things I have on my list, many, probably one, two, three, at least 7 or 8, but this is your center stage, you and the Premier. You have a question, something going on in your view of the politics of Saskatchewan, an issue that concerns you, anything on your mind. The phones are yours at 1-877-332-8255. What's that noise going on here?
Oh, hi. I was just playing the banjo. You know, it's funny. I practice a lot. It turns out I'm just not very good at it. Kind of like the Bombers. And football.
Okay, of all the things you've done, some thoughts on that one?
I don't know what you're talking about, John. That doesn't even sound like me.
Good try.
I think there's over 130,000 views of this thing on YouTube, which is pretty remarkable, and maybe it helps promote the game in the CFL. Sadly, the front 7 of the Winnipeg Blue Bombers were a part of the 100-and-some thousand views, I think.
Yeah, I said that yesterday. It was amazing how you inspired an entire province. Only problem was it was the wrong province. But, no, it was good. Anybody?
Oh, you got to have a little fun, John.
Oh, exactly. Okay, as we get going back into fall, and, you know, there's always that time, particularly in politics, you know, you've spent the summer, people are back in their ridings, there's sort of the, you know, the summer barbecue circuit. As you, and I've got a lot of, you know, current issues to ask you about, but as you start to look toward fall, a year ago, you unveiled this Saskatchewan growth agenda. You laid out a whole bunch of benchmarks, things you wanted to see. What do you go into this fall seeing for Saskatchewan as Premier?
Well, it is the growth plan, sort of the North Star reference point for our government, and it's never going to change. The elements of that growth plan that we updated last fall were very similar to what we campaigned on in opposition back before 2007 and then began to implement, knowing that obviously government shouldn't take credit for the growth, the unprecedented growth we're seeing, but there are certain things we can do as a government either to stay out of the way of growth or to deal with some of its challenges, maybe to create the right environment. And so, the short answer to your question is nothing's going to change. That's our plan. We know that the challenges with growth around infrastructure need to be dealt with. That will be part of the fall session, certainly. We know that the dividends of growth, which go to quality of life, including healthcare and education, those issues are ongoing, and we need to deal with those. And you're going to see some developments, for example, on the education front, for example, with respect to long-term care. But the prime directive for our government is the growth agenda, because we know that without growth, we don't actually have the expanded tax base, the dividends, if you will, the resources to deal with those issues and to try to keep the quality of life in a place where it actually it attracts more growth and more people, and we get this virtuous circle. So, if people are looking for a big change in direction in the fall, they'll be disappointed because we're going to keep going down the road we're going. It's got Saskatchewan in a leadership position. We're able to have some resources to deal with these other things, and that'll continue to be the hallmark of the government as we go forward.
Premier Brad Wall with us. This is Ask the Premier, my friends. 1-877-332-8255. Lines are lighting up. This is your chance to put your questions to Premier Brad Wall. You met with Thomas Mulcair yesterday, the leader of the NDP. What is it like to sit across from a guy who calls you Stephen Harper's mouthpiece?
It didn't really enter my mind. It doesn't. You're having a meeting with someone who is an aspirant to the Prime Minister's office, who's the leader of the opposition, and who has a chance to influence public policy in Canada. And so every one of those opportunities I think we need to take to further Saskatchewan's interests. And Saskatchewan's interests are furthered by things like Keystone getting built, so we can get a proper return on the oil resource that we have here in Western Canada. We need to challenge those people in politics who view our resource strength as a liability for the Canadian economy, who characterize it as Dutch disease, as Mr. Mulcair has done. So I had a paper I was able to present to him that was done by a leading economist from Laval University in his home province that was released recently that basically said, no, Dutch disease hasn't happened here. The resource strength of Canada has actually strengthened our manufacturing sector. We have those statistics to point to in province where we've seen seen growth in other sectors of the economy as we've diversified in addition to resource strength. So it's a chance to present our arguments in a more fulsome manner maybe than Twitter allows or even media clips. And I'm going to take every chance I can to do that. I don't think I convinced him of anything. We do agree on the Senate, of course, but not on these major issues, major economic issues.
But beyond the Senate, was there anything that you find yourself aligned with Mr. Mulcair on?
Well, you know that we have been calling as a provincial government for a federal healthcare innovation fund to complement the work that the provinces have been doing. Premier Giz and I chaired that working group for some time, and we've handed it off to some other co-chair premiers. But we, as provinces, are moving ahead to provide innovation in healthcare to drive down the cost, but ensure that care can be improved. And we found some success in terms of buying generics to get generic prescription medicine together, in examining best practices. What would be helpful, though, is if the federal government were to say, look, here's an innovation fund we can apply for. It's not unprecedented. We've seen it before, and it's all about driving that innovation in the system, bending the cost curve in healthcare, making it sustainable and improving care. And so there was an area that we were able to agree on as well.
Premier Brad Wall with us. So speaking of Mr. Mulcair and thinking all things Quebec, Quebec's new restrictions on religious symbols were released this morning to the public in terms of the whole idea of public servants in Quebec and what would be permissible and what wouldn't be. What do you think of this approach in Quebec?
I haven't seen the details, but I mean, I don't get it, John. Not in 2013, not in our country. And if any people in Quebec find these particular this new charter to be something with which they can't live, they're sure welcomed here. We're always looking to welcome new citizens to our province, and I just don't think it's a role for government. I'm not sure how it'll stand to challenge, and I'm not sure why, unless perhaps the government there wants to distract from other issues, why any provincial government would head down this road.
Premier Brad Wall with us. Okay, let's hit a couple of the... you often bring follow-ups from your last visit. I know there were some items of unfinished business. Do you have any of the ones you looked into from last month?
I sure do, John. There was three. There was a question from Travis from Cardiff, asked about foreign farmland ownership. We dealt with it principally on during Ask the Premier last time around. But just to be clear, the buyers from other countries in terms of farmland are limited to 10 acres, as we said in Saskatchewan. It varies across the country, but in our province, they're limited to 10 acres. Canadians, however, people from other parts of Canada can buy without any restriction at all. I would say this, and I think I mentioned this when it was first raised by Travis. If people are aware of or have heard of people breaking this law, basically, they need to contact the Farmland Security Board. There are investigations currently underway, and new ones can be opened up if these rules have been violated. There was another one from Mike on noxious odors, and the call was kind of breaking up, but I'm pretty sure it was about sour gas, about hydrogen sulfide. In 2011, John, our Ministry of the Economy introduced a couple of new regulatory directives aimed at noxious odors. In July, just this past July, 4 new state-of-the-art air monitors, which are called air pointers, were installed in the southeast. They're going to monitor the different gases, including H2S. And long story short, if people are violating the Oil and Gas Conservation Act that deals with these emissions, these wells can be shut in immediately. And if the infractions continue, there can be other penalties or even prosecution. Finally, on housing, Terry and Val Marie called in about someone in social housing who had got a rent notice increase. I can tell you, John, that we have been looking at social housing carefully as we have housing shortages in this province. We've been updating them. Social housing is about helping families on low income to provide them housing. We've determined that upwards of 15 tenants in social housing, not very many across the province, but 15 have incomes over $100,000. 800 more have income above the threshold for the program. So we need to make sure they're available for people who really need it, and we're moving to modernize the rates. Not more than 30% of anyone's income, though, will be charged in terms of rent, and they can work with their various housing authority. Those were the ones that were. Those were the three issues that were raised.
Right, Mr. Premier, Brad Wall is here. This is Ask the Premier, September edition. Okay, coming up, some questions of taxation in RMs. We'll start with that. Mental health policy in the province. Also, employment for the disabled, among other issues. It's you and Premier Brad Wall, 1-877-332-8255 only on News Talk Radio. I'm John Gormley. Premier Brad Wall is here. This is our September installment of Ask the Premier. Premier Wall, shall we take some calls?
Absolutely.
Okay, let's go to the first guy hanging on. Todd in Saskatoon. You're on with Premier Brad Wall, and you have a question on taxation.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Premier and Mr. Gormley. I have a small business just outside of Saskatoon. We're in the RM of Grant, and going through, it's a couple different levels, but going through some negotiations with our RM on the municipal tax rate. We've done some negotiations. It has come down some, but still they feel that it's a proper increase coming out of pocket for me of just over 45%, which is an additional almost $1,500 compared to last year. They are telling me at the meeting, and I understand there's two sides of the story, and I'm definitely not throwing you under the bus on this, but I'd like to hear the Saskatchewan side of the story. The RM of Grant claims that they are still owed over $500,000 from road construction that was asked to be performed by the Saskatchewan government, and they are in a pinch. Thus, they have to raise taxes to basically stay afloat. We're a small business, family-based. I want to pay my own way. I don't want to be a burden on society. I know both of you are really good people, and you like to do what's right. I just need some help, and I'm talking to two of the best problem solvers, I guess, in the province.
I'm not sure about the specifics of their claim with respect to roads. It would be something that we would want to check on very specifically. We've worked hard to significantly reduce property taxes, at least as far as education property taxes go. It's something we campaigned on in 2007. We kept the promise, and they've gone down significantly for agriculture land, but also for any land, any municipal education property tax in a municipality. But I would want to check specifically with respect to this claim before I commented further.
Okay, can we get that one as a look for next month?
We sure. And Todd, you should probably contact an MLA's office just so we don't lose sight of your specific case. Whatever constituency you might be in, I would just contact that office and let them know that you raised this on John Gormley Live and that we're going to look into it as well.
Premier Brad Wall, Ask the Premier, 1-877-332-8255. Okay, I'm just looking down the screen. We have a ton of calls coming up. In Swift Current, Scott, you're on with Premier Brad Wall.
I was wondering how this help for the disabled workers for disabled workers to receive jobs. I know I've already gained help through it. I just wanted to. Okay,
Scott, so have you got a specific example, Scott, of of a certain type of disability or what's going on with it, or?
Visually despaired.
Okay, so
disabled.
A visually disabled person. Now, is there a provincial program you're inquiring about, or?
Work for the disabled, I want to bring attention.
Well, we've done a couple of things, John. As you know, we've established the Saskatchewan Assured Income for the Disabled, a support program for those who either cannot work, frankly, the increase in support for those folks, but also those who are able to work a little bit to provide a bit of a bridge. And so we created the program and then have significantly increased it. In fact, June 1, it went up again, $50 per month per individual, $60 per couple. Over and above that, we have an amazing network of non-government agencies right across this province that work carefully with social services who are there to try to help find employment. Whether it's an Ability Center or a Cosmo, we have a number of them across the province. Here in Swift Current, where Scott is, we have the Ability Center. As a government, by the way, when it comes to those who have visual impairment, we have been looking to provide work for those folks directly within government. I can think of a couple of anecdotal examples off the top of my head that ministers have shared with me. And so, again, if Scott were to, it sounds like Scott has got the employment he's looking for, and he's inquiring now for others about the information. If he directs them to our MLA office, and then we can work with the Ability Center and the Ministry of Social Services, or to any constituency office, that's where we can perhaps try to find some options for others that are also looking to work.
Premier Bradwell. Other issue before we get back to the calls, Premier, the temporary foreign worker program, which has been around now for a long time, being used by many employers in Saskatchewan, is now being targeted by the Saskatchewan Federation of Labour, which says historically the TFW program was used for something differently than it's being used now. The Federation of Labour says workers are being treated poorly. They're taking jobs that should be used for people here. How do you respond to these particular criticisms?
Well, it's a blanket statement. I'm sure you'll find examples now and in the past where their accusations may, in fact, be the case. But by and large, employers are looking to fill jobs those who have jobs unfulfilled are looking to find people first in province, and then if not in province, from other parts of the country, and if not there, through the immigrant nominee program, working through channels, and then if not there, and if there's no other alternative, they are moving to the temporary foreign worker program. And John, it's interesting to note about half of the people who are quote unquote temporary residents, in other words, they're part of the temporary foreign worker program here in Saskatchewan, or students, temporary residents, about half of them make their way into the immigrant nominee program, and we get a chance to keep them as permanent residents. So it's not all bad when you have folks here on a temporary basis who find employment. You got a good chance to keep them. As a government, our plan around the labor shortage we laid out in the growth plan we talked about off the top of this particular segment. The first priority is to fully engage First Nations people in this province engage them to a greater extent. Progress is being made. Aboriginal unemployment is down 3 points in the last job numbers that came out on Friday. Second is people from other parts of Canada, and third is newcomers. That's the priority for the government, and I think it's the priority for employers. If there are specific cases of abuses, perhaps, those should be reported to the feds, and we should also know about them, and we can they can be investigated. But right now, we need an all-of-the-above approach to deal with what is a labor shortage in Saskatchewan.
Premier Brad Wallace here. This is Ask the Premier. We're at the halfway point. Many more callers coming up. And you at 1-877-332-8255. I'm John Gormley, and this is News Talk Radio. I'm John Gormley. Premier Brad Wallace here. This is our September edition of Ask the Premier, so let's get back to your calls. 1-877-332-8255. Let me go to Jake, who's been hanging on. Sir, thank you for your call. Mental health policy and the Premier.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Premier, for taking my call. I have a question about mental health. I understand you're doing a review of your mental health policy. I'm wondering what we can expect in the fall coming up in that issue. And the other question I have is with the same problem. I have a relative who's schizophrenic, and every time she goes into the hospital for a short period of time, social services cuts off her allowance as far as, I bought her a condo so that she's an adult, so she has a place to live. And they pay for half, and I pay for half. Now, when she goes in the hospital, they cut her off on her half of the payment, so that forces me to pay the whole thing. And I'm wondering if that's something that can be changed.
Well, in the latter piece, I think that's something we want to look at, and you may want to call into the constituency office that's nearest you and reference the call in so we could have a look at that specific issue. You're right. We are moving towards a sweeping and broadly based mental health strategy for Saskatchewan. In the last budget, we provided just under $240 million, or about 5% of the budget would have went to mental health. That's an increase. It's a 33% increase. So we've been putting some resources in. Of course, we've also announced the replacement for Saskatchewan Hospital, which would be the anchor in North Battleford. It would be the anchor for the mental health strategy. But notwithstanding those resources and a new Saskatchewan Hospital, what we have found in our province is that we have never really had a sweeping strategy, a plan for mental health going forward, and that's what we're in the process of developing. And if you'd like to have some input into that process, which won't report out this fall, the work is going to be ongoing through the fall. It's being led, by the way, by a frontline clinical psychologist, Dr. Fern Stockdale-Winder. And you can, again, make sure you provide your input to that process by contacting a constituency officer, going online to the government website. We would be very interested in hearing from you, and we can take a look at that specific case as well.
1-877-332-8255. Premier Brad Wall on the September installment of Ask the Premier. Jerry in Prince Albert, you're on with the Premier.
Morning, Premier. The Diefenbaker Bridge in Prince Albert, in the study that came out late last winter, this spring, and said that we were good to go for another 30 years. After that study came out, we found out from the city of Prince Albert they hadn't even checked the piers below the water line. So I can't see where they can say for sure this bridge is good to go for 30 years, because I'm sure the piers are a very important part of the structure. Another thing is, you and John are both very familiar with Prince Albert. There is tons of dangerous goods. It's actually highway number 2, coming down a steep hill, crossing two railway tracks, right beside a shopping mall, within a block of downtown Prince Albert. It's just a disaster waiting to happen. The third thing that report said, there's not enough industry north of the river in Prince Albert to warrant a second bridge. There's not enough industry out there because there's no reliable way of getting across the river. Even after the report came out and said it's good for 30 years, that bridge has been restricted several times this summer already, so I wouldn't invest north of Prince Albert either.
Okay, so Jerry, the question?
Sure. Thanks, John. Well, first of all, with respect to the piers, we can report back specifically on your show next time on what we know through Ministry of Highways and in our work with the City of Prince Albert about the structure's integrity. I would just say, with respect to the caller's last comment on development across the river, it's happening now. Companies have decided to move. One company in particular, of course, is reanimating the old pulp mill. We've already got cogeneration happening there. That's new investment. With pulp to follow, and so there certainly has been industry in the past with one bridge, and there will be new industry. There is new investment today. We've said pretty clearly that as investment or as the economy and traffic warranted, we would be happy to look at the issue again. It's just when you have this independent study that's done that verifies independent studies and ministerial highways ministry work that's been done in the past under 2 different governments. That say, look, it's not quite there yet, then we have to honor that, respect that kind of information. But I think we do see development happening north of the river, and we're going to see hopefully more of it as that pulp mill gets going again.
Premier Brad Wallace here, 1-877-332-8255. Ask the Premier. Premier, we're going to actually be checking in a little bit later with the lawyer for the family, the Pakistani-Canadian family, who appear to have been caught in limbo now. In this story, and Peshawar, which is a very rough area of Pakistan, you've got the Saskatoon woman who goes over to Peshawar and adopts her ill sister's newborn son. And this is a family that's had all sorts of problems over there. So inside the same family, they do the adoption, the courts there sign off, they honor it. But apparently Pakistan has never signed the Hague Convention, which governs international child adoption. And that's been preventing social services here from permitting it. So you've got the Saskatoon mom effectively living in Pakistan with the new adopted baby because she can't bring him back. Is this worth a look and a consideration of change?
The answer is yes, it is, John. I've asked officials actually over the weekend, early Saturday morning, to make this a priority to find out what we can do, find out what discretion exists, engage with the federal government. The United States certainly allows for adoptions from Pakistan, notwithstanding the Hague Convention. And the Hague Convention is about protecting kids, so we can't be cavalier about this. But this is obviously a pretty clear-cut and compelling adoption case. And so we have asked officials to look at every possible avenue, every opportunity we could to assist in the adoption to make it happen.
Now, is Social Services Saskatchewan being somehow blocked by Ottawa then as a result of the Hague Convention, or is it an internal standard here?
There is interaction with Ottawa on this piece, and even the Minister Bill Boyd, not Social Services Bill has the economy file, and therefore the immigration piece. His office is engaging with the feds as well on it now. We are going to be working with them and looking internally at options we have without the feds, frankly, to see if we can't be a force for good on this with this adoption.
1-877-332-8255. Megan in Francis, Saskatchewan. A question on short line railroads.
Hi, Mr. Wall. How are you today?
I'm well, Megan. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. I appreciate you taking my call. I was calling in regards to short line railways because this province has, according to a government website, over 2,000 kilometers of short line rail in the province, which has been taken over from previous federally regulated railway. And my question comes into responsibility regarding not only liability but costs associated with crossing maintenance for municipalities. From my count, approximately 70 rural municipalities are affected with short-line rails and could be inheriting a lot of those costs with crossing maintenance, which were not normally the case. Just wondered if you can give a little bit more feedback on that.
Well, it's certainly an interesting issue and something that I would want to check into specifically with both Jim Ryder, who's the Minister of Government Relations, and I'm sure may have heard from SARM on this, the Saskatchewan Association of Rural Municipalities, as well as Highways and Transportation, who are directly involved in the short-line railway file. Megan's right. We have more short-line railways now in the province, obviously, as the other lines have, as the other rail companies have moved away from certain lines. They are important parts of the economy, frankly, and we're seeing applications for more of them as we need to find ways to move what we have in a province that has a lot of food and energy to market around the world. We need to move it outside of our borders, and we see companies responding. So it's certainly worth an inquiry, and I'll do that. And it's another one we can report back on next time, John.
Premier Brad Wallace here. Coming up, questions including surface right leases when you want to put a rig on farmland. We have a good question coming up on that. Premier, it came up yesterday, or at least your comments, and this, let me bring you back to the Thomas Mulcair meeting. You talked about the NDP brand, I think was the term you used. You've got Mr. Mulcair federally hosting his caucus in Saskatchewan for 2 days. You have Cam Broughton, the newly minted NDP leader. As you head into the fall, the snapshot on Saskatchewan politics. Is the NDP beginning to retain or move back to a position of challenging the political debate in this province?
Well, our research says no. And, it's interesting under Mr. Broughton, we've seen obviously some changes, and that's to be expected. But by this time in my tenure after becoming leader of the party in 2004, our party had made a number of changes. I had released an economic paper that highlighted the growth agenda that would one day have the honor of implementing after the 2007 election, but we put it out there for debate. And we were in the process of reviewing all of our policy, culminating in a convention which in the current time frame would be this fall for the NDP, where a number of policies were changed and we were responding to a consultative process. We haven't seen that at all from the NDP. We hear them basically still blaming Mr. Lingenfelter and a snowstorm for the last election. And I think it misses the point. I think that the people of the province will be looking for a change. Right now, Mr. Broughton is still campaigning on the $5 billion platform from the last election that included policies like the revenue resource sharing that just were rejected by Saskatchewan people. So I see that provincial brand hurting the federal brand. Even today I saw some tweets with Mr. Broughton speaking to the federal NDP, not mentioning Keystone. You've got to stand up for Saskatchewan interests, even when perhaps those interests aren't reflected with your federal party.
Premier Brad Wallace here. This is Ask the Premier. Stand by. More of your calls next on News Talk Radio. I'm John Gormley, Premier Brad Wallace here. This is our September edition of Ask the Premier. 60 minutes on the phone or sometimes in studio with Premier Brad Wall, and he takes your calls on the radio. Let's get back to Pierre in Macklin. Sir, a question on surface leases.
Good morning, Premier Brad Wall. Thank you for taking my call.
Hey, Pierre.
Thank you for what you've done with Saskatchewan. It's been incredible. Premier Wall, my question regarding the Surface Rights and Arbitration Board, it's being under review now provincially, I believe. And my question is, in regards to annual lease rentals paid,
right.
When they're up for renewal, the Surface Rights Board does not recognize the fact that inflation, and over, every 3 years are renewed, and in that time inflation has increased 1%, 2%, 3%. And they do not recognize that. Is there any possibility that the Surface Rights Board is looking into that? And I'd like to extend an invitation to you and your family to come to Macklin the long weekend of August for our annual World Bunnock Championship.
Bunnock, yes.
Thanks very much for that, Pierre, for the invitation. I would just say that your suggestion with respect to inflation and the compensation on surface rights is one that should be submitted to the review. You're right. We announced in August there's a complete review of surface rights compensation and the legislation that governs it. And so you can go to our website. You can also actually email surfacerights@gov.sk.ca or call 787-4007 and provide that input.
All right, Premier Brad Wallace here. Okay, during the commercial, you mentioned that you had an update on this Prince Albert Diefenbaker Bridge question that Jerry had posed.
I do. Typically, the inspections would follow, inspections of the piers would follow excessive extreme flows, for example, if they had happened, or if there's any evidence of structural deformation. We have made the offer through the Urban Connectors program, and by the way, they would be done by the City of PA for Jerry's call there from Prince Albert, and so we have made the offer and budgeted in the Urban Highway Connector program if PA wishes to use that for inspection and they want them to be performed.
All right, let's go to Tisdale in northeastern Saskatchewan. Ella, you're on with Premier Brad Wall.
Good morning to both of you. I'm calling about the CCSVI trials that were canceled in Albany, and just wondering what is in the future for Saskatchewan, because Saskatchewan has been so good about supporting the MS community, and there are so many. So just wondering what was happening with that.
Ella, thanks for the call. We were very disappointed that the doctor's trials could not continue. They were the only FDA-approved trials that were happening. He simply couldn't find enough U.S. participants in the trial for it to continue along within the rules that were governing the trial set down by the FDA, and so he made the difficult decision to stop them. We first tried to get other provinces on board so we could get enough Canadians, perhaps, to make up for it. Some have gone down from Saskatchewan because we were paying just over $2 million to participate in the trial. All of those people are being contacted by those who were conducting the trial to let them know whether they had the actual procedure or a placebo. And in the meantime, the minister said, we will use the remaining dollars for MS research. We'll work with the MS Society and find out what's the best way to deploy it. We have one of the highest rates of MS per capita that you'd find anywhere in the world. So we want to continue to lead in this. And we regret the fact that these trials aren't going on, but not the fact that we were prepared to step out on behalf of those who have MS and their families and the MS Society, and we'll continue to do that with dollars for research.
Premier Brad Wallace here. Let's get back, if we have time, for Hazel in Redverse, Saskatchewan. Hazel, you have a question on long-term care.
Yes, I do. Thank you for taking my call. I'm calling about the $20 fee that is charged to each resident in long-term care facilities in the province for incidentals that they use. I have my husband's in a personal care home, and there is a list of incidentals that we are charged $20 per month. But since he has been in the personal care home, this is what he has used. He's only used 1 bar of hand soap, 2 boxes of Kleenex, 1 tube of toothpaste, 1 toothbrush. And we're charged each month $20.
And how long has that been that he's used those things?
6.5 months.
Oh, my goodness. Okay,
yeah,
so you paid
and that's all. And we're being charged $20 each month for these incidentals.
Have you raised it with the nursing home, Hazel?
Oh, yes, I've raised it with the with our health district. A number of different places I have mentioned this. In 2011-12, we had 8,575 long-term care beds. That brings in an income of $2,058,000 for the province.
Wow, I'm going to flip that one over to the Premier because I hear the music. Premier Wall?
Well, thanks, Hazel, for the call. There were some changes made recently because in some regions there were no fees being charged, and others the fees were larger than, I think, higher than what Hazel's mentioned. I stand to be corrected there. But if there's not value for the fee, I mean, I think it's something the region will want to look at, something the ministry we would also want to look at. But these fees have now been standardized across the province, and we can certainly continue to monitor whether or not there's value for them, because obviously that's a priority for those who are in care.
Mr. Premier, good having you by as always. We'll probably chat in the meantime, but we'll see you next month on Ask the Premier.
Thanks for the time, John. All the best. Take care.
Premier Brad Wall.